The morning started the way it always does for me, with ordinary building sounds. The upstairs shower turning on, the radiator clicking like it was trying to decide if winter was done with us. Someone's shoes on the stair treads, the same 3 loose boards that squeak in the same places every time. I was at my small kitchen table in my 3rd-floor walk-up in Philadelphia, sorting maintenance slips and half listening to the kettle. My apartment sits over the front entry of the building I manage. It is not fancy. The hallway paint is a little tired, and the mailboxes have dents that never quite smooth out. But it's been home for years, and it's been home for everyone else who lives here too. Then my sister came in without knocking. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask if I was busy. She just set a folded notice on my table like she was placing a receipt down at a restaurant. I unfolded it and read the new rent amount first, because it was printed in a clean, confident font, centered like it was meant to look reasonable. $7,900. For a second, I thought I was reading someone else's letter, someone else's unit, a typo, anything. My rent for the same narrow apartment with the sticky window in the bedroom was going from $2,150 to nearly 4 times that, effective in 30 days. Market adjustment, the paper said, as if the building itself had decided it. I looked up. My sister Tessa was leaning against the counter with a small, satisfied smile, watching my face the way people watch a screen when they already know the ending. I didn't give her the reaction she wanted. I just set the notice down flat, smoothed the crease with 2 fingers, and listened to the kettle begin to whistle. Tessa said softly, like it was a helpful reminder, "The market can handle it." Then she walked out like she'd done a normal errand. An hour later, my parents called me together on speaker, as if it was a business update. They explained why it was fair. They used words like opportunity and appreciation and investment, carefully stepping around the obvious truth that nobody in this building could pay that kind of money and keep their lives steady. They said my below-market rent had been a favor, and favors don't last forever. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment and stared at the grease pencil notes stuck to my fridge. A work order for a leaky sink, a reminder to check the boiler pressure, someone's request for an extra key. I wanted to say a lot. I didn't. I just listened until there was a gap in their voices, and I said, "Okay." After I ended the call, I put my phone face down on the table. What they didn't know was that my fingernails still had faint ink under them from a different set of papers I'd been handling earlier that week. Papers I'd never mentioned to Tessa. Papers my parents had never asked about. A quiet detail that had been sitting in my life for years, waiting for the right moment to matter. I didn't know yet exactly how I was going to use it. I only knew that the way my sister smiled at my kitchen table was going to age badly, and that before the week was over, I would be walking into an office I hadn't visited in years, carrying a folder I wasn't supposed to have. By late afternoon, the building felt different. It wasn't loud. Nobody was shouting. But the hallway had that unsettled movement you notice when people are trying not to panic. Doors opened and closed more than usual. Conversations started in low voices and stopped when footsteps came near. The news had traveled. It always does in a place like ours. Mrs. Alvarez stood by the stairwell with an envelope in her hands, reading the same lines over and over like the numbers might rearrange themselves. "She's lived here since before I was old enough to drive." Her hands trembled, just slightly, the way hands do when you're trying to hold yourself together. Across the hall, Mr. Coyle leaned on his walker and stared at the floor, quietly repeating his unit number like it was a math problem he could solve if he stayed focused long enough. Down the corridor, the Park family was folding clothes into a cardboard box, and their little boy kept asking if they were moving forever. No one answered him directly. People didn't look at me like they blamed me. They looked at me like I might have an explanation. "Do we have to leave?" Mrs. Alvarez asked. Not angrily, not even accusing, just tired. I told her, "Not today," because it was the only honest sentence I had right then. But when I went back into my apartment and shut the door, I felt the weight of it settle into my chest. It wasn't just my rent. It was everyone's stability. It was the building my grandmother had poured her life into, unit by unit, repair by repair, like it mattered who lived inside it. My grandmother, Ruth, used to say the building had a heartbeat. She'd say it while holding a ring of keys, her thumb always resting on the one that opened the basement door. She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays and boiler serial numbers with the same calm focus. She didn't like waste, she didn't like cruelty. She didn't trust people who talked about maximizing value without ever meeting the people affected by it. Tessa talked like that now. So did my parents, when it suited them. I was standing at my sink, staring out at the back alley, when someone knocked. It was a soft knock, the kind you do when you're trying not to make a moment bigger than it already is. When I opened the door, Marisol Rivera was there. She lived on the first floor, had for a long time. She wore a scarf even indoors, and she carried herself like someone who noticed everything without announcing it. Marisol didn't step back into the hallway to keep distance. She stepped inside like she had a reason to be here. She looked at my face for a second, then at the rent notice still on my table. And without sitting down yet, she said, "Your grandmother didn't keep her important things where everyone else keeps theirs." I didn't answer right away. I just waited. Marisol took a slow breath, then lowered herself into the chair by my table, hands folded neatly as if she'd practiced this. "There are keys," she said, "the old ones she didn't talk about. And there are papers. She told me, years ago, that if your family ever tried to force people out, you were the one she trusted to handle it." I felt my throat tighten, but I kept my voice even. "What are you saying?" Marisol met my eyes calmly. "I'm saying," she replied, "you should go look where she would hide something from people who only care about money." Then she glanced toward the small bowl by my door where I tossed my everyday keys. And I realized, very suddenly, that I still had my grandmother's old ring of keys tucked in the back of a drawer, the ones I'd never used because I never thought I'd need to. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on the edge of the table, listening to the radiator click again. Then I went to my bedroom dresser and opened the drawer I almost never opened. And when I saw that worn ring of keys sitting exactly where I'd left it, I understood that whatever came next was not going to be handled over the phone. I picked them up, and I didn't put them back. I sat on the edge of my bed with the key ring in my hand and let it rest there for a minute, heavy and familiar. My grandmother's keys had a certain sound, not a bright jingle, more of a dull clink, like they'd been carried in real pockets for real work. The metal was worn smooth where her thumb used to press. There was one key with a faded blue cap, one that looked newer than the rest, and a flat brass one that didn't match anything in my apartment. I didn't go downstairs right away. First, I did what I always do when something feels unstable. I made the smallest bit of order I could. I rinsed my coffee mug. I wiped the counter. I folded the rent notice and put it in a folder with the building paperwork, the one I keep for tenant communications. Then I sat back down at the table and stared at the folder like it might tell me what to do. The radiator clicked again. Somewhere down the hall, a cabinet shut hard. The building was still moving, still living, even while everyone was quietly bracing. I picked up my phone and scrolled through missed calls and texts. Mostly residents. A couple messages from the super at a neighboring building asking if I'd heard the rumors. One text from Tessa that simply said, "Let's keep this professional." I didn't respond. I opened my notes app instead and wrote down what I knew, in plain language, like I was making a repair list. Rent notice delivered without warning. Market adjustment language parents on speaker. Aligned with Tessa residents already scared keys from Grandma Marisol's warning. I sat with that list until my breathing felt normal again. Then I called Marisol. She answered on the second ring, like she'd been expecting it. "I found the keys," I said. "Good," she replied. "Don't tell your sister." I wasn't going to. There was a small pause, then she said, "Your grandmother used to say, if you want to know what someone values, watch what they protect." She protected that basement like it mattered. "I've been down there," I said. 100 times. It's just storage." Marisol's voice stayed steady. "It looks like storage, that's the point. And Ruth liked things that looked ordinary." I heard her shift slightly, maybe moving a dish, maybe turning down a radio. Life sounds. Do you know what I'm looking for? I asked. No, she said. And I'm not going to guess. But I know how your grandmother moved. She didn't trust desks and filing cabinets. She trusted habits. She trusted places people forgot. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Okay. One more thing, she added. Your sister didn't come up with that number alone. That kind of rent jump, that kind of timing, it's usually attached to something else, a plan, someone advising her. That landed quietly in my chest. I didn't argue with it. It matched what I'd felt since the call with my parents, the way they sounded rehearsed. After I hung up, I sat for another minute, then stood and went to the hallway. The building smelled like someone's dinner starting early. Onion and oil, a faint chemical tang from the mop water I'd used in the morning. The carpet runner on the stairs was worn thin in the center. I'd been meaning to replace it for 2 years. As I started down, doors cracked open. People watched without fully stepping out. Mrs. Alvarez gave me a small look, like a question she didn't want to ask again. I stopped beside her and spoke softly. I'm working on it. She searched my face. Are we really going to have to go? Not today, I said again, and this time I added, and I'm not signing anything that puts you on the street. Her shoulders dropped a fraction, not relief exactly, but something close to it. She nodded once and went back inside. I continued down to the first floor, past the little table near the mailboxes where flyers pile up. A lost cat poster, a church fundraiser, a notice about street cleaning. The front door's lock stuck in cold weather. I'd fixed it twice already. At the back of the first floor hallway was the basement door. Metal, painted a beige that had yellowed over time. The frame always caught in summer humidity, like it didn't want to open unless you meant it. I slid the key ring around until I found the flat brass key. It fit, but I had to turn it slowly. The lock resisted, then gave with a muted click. I pushed the door. It didn't budge at first. I leaned my shoulder into it, felt the edge press into my coat, and then it opened with a stiff scrape. The basement air hit me like a memory. Dust, old paint, a faint dampness that never fully leaves a building this old. The boiler's low hum ran through the pipes like a distant engine. The pull chain for the light was just inside. I tugged it once. A single bulb flickered on and steadied, throwing a small circle of light over the concrete floor. Everything down there was exactly as I remembered. Boxes from tenants who moved out years ago. A broken chair someone promised they'd pick up and never did. Bundled extension cords. A shelf of paint cans with handwritten labels. And yet it felt different, because I was looking at it differently. I walked slowly, letting my eyes adjust, letting my brain settle into the way my grandmother used to scan a space. She would stand still first, take in the whole room, then move with purpose, not rushed. I did the same. I went to the main storage shelves and ran my fingers along the edges. Dust came away in a thin gray line on my skin. I saw the spot where we used to keep holiday decorations. I saw the old toolbox Ruth kept even after her hands started to ache. The sewing cabinet was still there too, tucked into a corner like it belonged. A squat wooden thing with drawers that no longer slid properly. My grandmother refused to throw it out. I stood in front of it for a moment, thinking about Marisol's words. Habits, ordinary places. Then I crouched and put my hands under the cabinet. It was heavier than I expected. I shifted it inch by inch, wood scraping softly against concrete. The sound echoed in the basement like a whisper. When I moved it far enough, I saw something I'd never noticed before. A faint seam in the floor panels. Not a crack from age, but a straight line, deliberate, like a board that had been lifted and set back down many times. My heartbeat didn't speed up much. It just became louder in my awareness, like a clock. I wedged my fingers into the seam and pulled. The board resisted, then lifted with a soft groan. Underneath, a small weatherproof box sat in a shallow cavity, dark and dusted, like it had been waiting without impatience. I stared at it for a second, just long enough to understand that whatever was inside would change the day. Then I reached down and picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. I set it on the concrete beside me, wiped my hands on my jeans, and placed my fingers on the latch. Then I waited. I opened the latch slowly, like I was trying not to disturb the air around it. The lid lifted with a soft seal break, that quiet suction sound plastic makes when it's been closed a long time. Inside, everything was packed tighter than I expected. Not random, not shoved in, stacked with intention. There were 2 folders wrapped in thick rubber bands, a small metal tin, 3 sealed envelopes, each labeled in my grandmother's neat handwriting, and a folded sheet of paper on top, like a cover note. I picked up the folded paper first. It was a single line, written in pencil, then traced over in pen. For when someone tries to take what isn't theirs. That was all. No explanation, no emotion. Just a practical sentence, the way Ruth did everything. I sat back on my heels and opened the metal tin. It rattled the way it had when I first lifted the box. Inside was another set of keys, fewer than the ring I'd brought down, but newer. One had a white plastic tag with a number stamped into it, the kind you get from a safety deposit box or a file cabinet. My throat tightened a little, but I didn't let it run away with me. I set the keys aside and opened the first folder. At the top was an operating agreement, thick paper, notarized stamp. The title sat cleanly across the page. Parkview Holdings, LLC. For a second, the name didn't connect to anything in my mind. Then it did, quietly, the way realization moves when it has nowhere else to go. Parkview was the name printed on the brass plaque in our lobby, the name everyone thought belonged to my parents' trust, because it always had. The name my sister liked to use when she talked to vendors, like she was already running things. My eyes moved down the page. Registered address, state filings, member structure, and then I saw it. Sole managing member, Aaron Blake. That was me. Not a cosigner, not a beneficiary, not acting manager, not authorized agent, the sole managing member. My name was typed in plain black ink like it was the most normal thing in the world. Beneath it was a signature line with my grandmother's signature, and next to it, mine. Not my current signature, the older version, the one I used years ago before I started signing everything digitally. I remembered the day, suddenly, in small flashes, sitting at her dining table, a stack of papers, her saying, "This is boring, honey, but it matters. Sign where I highlighted." I had thought it was routine, a management update, a permission form, something to help her organize. I kept reading. There were exhibits attached, including a schedule of assets, and listed plainly, as if it were a chair or a car. Property, 23-17 Walnut Row, Philadelphia, PA, 18-unit residential building. Our building. I set the folder down, carefully, and held my hands on my knees for a moment. The concrete felt cold through my jeans. The boiler hummed steadily, like it didn't care about my life at all. Then I opened the second folder. This one was thicker, full of printed emails and transaction logs. The emails were between my sister, Tessa, and a name I didn't recognize at first, Graham Holt. The messages were polite, professional, and slightly too friendly in the way people get when money is involved. They discussed tenant turnover, pricing reset, and vacancy acceleration. There was a spreadsheet referenced multiple times. In one thread, Graham wrote that a sharp adjustment would force the issue quickly, and Tessa replied that she had family alignment and a manager on site who will fall in line. I read that line twice, not because it was shocking, but because it was clarifying. In her mind, I wasn't a person. I was a position, something to be managed. Behind the emails were bank records, monthly transfers, withdrawals labeled as maintenance reserve, consulting fees, vendor payments. Some of them were normal, plumbing, electrical, pest control, but some were wrong. Repeated payments to the same 2 entities, both with generic names that could belong to anything. Holt Advisory Group, Keystone Redevelopment Services. The amounts were too clean, too round, too frequent, and there were no invoices attached for several of them, just payment confirmations. My grandmother had underlined some entries with a red pen. Next to one cluster of withdrawals, she'd written a single word: verify. I put that folder down and opened the first sealed envelope. It was addressed to me, in Ruth's handwriting. No stamp, no mail crease. It had been sealed and stored, not sent. I slid a finger under the flap and opened it. Inside was a letter, short but dense, written the way she spoke when she wanted you to listen. She wrote that she loved my parents, but didn't trust them with the building anymore. She wrote that my sister treated people like outcomes, and that it would get worse as she got older, not better. She wrote that the building had always been more than an asset, and that she needed someone in control who understood that. Then she wrote something that made me pause. She said she had arranged the ownership so that no one could legally raise rents or enter redevelopment agreements without my signature. Not my parents', not Tessa's, mine. She wrote it like a safety instruction. She also wrote that she had kept records of money leaving the building that never came back, and that if I ever needed help understanding it, I should speak to the attorney whose name she underlined twice. Martin Klein. I exhaled slowly through my nose and looked up at the basement light, as if the bulb might steady me. Martin Klein. I remembered him. Not clearly, but enough. A small office near Rittenhouse, quiet, older style. Ruth had taken me with her once when I was younger. I'd sat in a waiting room with a bowl of mints and a stack of local magazines. At the time, I thought it was just grown-up errands. I put the letter back in the envelope and opened the second sealed envelope. This one contained a single sheet titled Authorization and Access. It referenced a safety deposit box at a local bank branch. The number on the key tag suddenly made sense. I didn't open the third envelope yet. I didn't need to. The first shift had already happened, right there on the basement floor, because the rent notice on my kitchen table wasn't just cruel. It was meaningless, not emotionally, practically. Tessa could print whatever number she wanted in a professional font. She could smile over it. She could get my parents on speaker and call it fair, but she couldn't enforce it, not without me. I closed the folders, stacked everything neatly the way my grandmother would have, and put them back into the weatherproof box. Then I picked up the box and the extra keys and turned off the basement light. Upstairs, the hallway felt quieter than before, like the building was waiting with me. I went into my apartment, set the box on the table, and pulled out my laptop. Then I started looking up one thing first: Parkview Holdings, LLC in the State Business Registry. And when the filing page loaded and my name appeared again in black and white, I sat back in my chair and let the silence settle. Then I reached for my phone and hovered over my sister's text. I didn't answer it. Not yet. I didn't reply to my sister's text that night. I made tea instead. Chamomile, the cheap kind in paper packets. I stood at the counter and watched the steam rise, and I let my shoulders drop the way they do when the body finally understands it can stop bracing for a second. Then I opened my notebook again. My grandmother used to say that panic makes people sloppy. She didn't say it like advice. She said it like a fact. I'd watched her handle problems the same way for years, from a burst pipe to a tenant dispute to a surprise tax notice. She always went quiet first, so I went quiet. Then I made a plan, simple and procedural, like a checklist. Step 1, confirm control in writing. Step 2, freeze damage. Step 3, document everything. Step 4, bring in the right third parties. Step 5, speak only when the record is ready. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't brave. It was just the only way I knew to keep the building steady. I started with step 1. The next morning, before anyone could corner me in the hallway, I called the state registry number listed on the LLC filing site and requested certified copies of the operating agreement and most recent annual report. It took 20 minutes, a bored-sounding clerk, a small fee, an email confirmation. Then I called the bank branch listed on the authorization sheet. I didn't tell them the story. I didn't mention my sister. I just said I had a safety deposit box key and paperwork that showed access. The manager asked for my ID and said I could come in that afternoon. After that, I walked the building. Not like a manager checking for problems, like someone taking a baseline. I photographed the lobby, the stairwell, the boiler gauges, the electrical panel. I took pictures of the roof access door and the basement storage shelves. Not because anything was wrong, but because I wanted a clean before file. Then I knocked on a few doors. Not everyone. Just the residents who looked the most shaken the day before. Mrs. Alvarez answered immediately. Her chain was on. "I'm not asking you to sign anything," I told her. "I just want you to know 2 things." Her eyes stayed fixed on mine. "1," I said, "I'm not approving those rent changes. Not for you, not for anyone. And 2, if anyone comes asking to enter your unit for an inspection, you don't have to let them in unless they give proper written notice, and you verify it with me first." Her face changed slightly, like her body didn't want to believe me, but her mind heard the steadiness. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I'm sure," I said. She nodded once. "Okay." Mr. Coyle opened his door slower. He looked tired, like sleep hadn't done much for him. "They can't just do this," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "They can't." That was the first time I let myself say it out loud with certainty. By mid-morning, the hallway had a different kind of energy. Still cautious, but less helpless. People weren't smiling. They were just standing a little straighter. Then my phone started ringing. First my mom. I let it ring out. Then my dad. I let it ring out too. Then Tessa. I watched her name on the screen and let it fade into silence. I wasn't ignoring them to punish them. I was buying space because space is where you build records. When the call stopped, I texted one message, to all 3 of them in a group thread. "I'm reviewing the notice and the financials. Please put any requests or decisions in writing. I'll respond once I've confirmed the documents." It was boring on purpose. A few minutes later, Tessa replied, "Stop making this messy. You don't have authority to stall. We have investors looking at timelines." Investors. There it was again, slipped in like she couldn't help herself. I took a screenshot and saved it into a folder on my laptop labeled Parkview 2026. Then I went to the bank. The branch was small and quiet, tucked between a dry cleaner and a nail salon. The kind of place people walk past without noticing. Inside, the air smelled like carpet shampoo and printer toner. The manager, a woman in a gray blazer, looked at my paperwork carefully. She didn't react. She didn't judge. She just verified, initialed, and led me to the back. The safety deposit room was cool, lit by fluorescent panels that made everything look flatter than it was. She watched while I inserted the key and opened the box. Inside was another folder, thicker than the ones in the basement, and a flash drive in a small padded sleeve. There was also a second operating document, this one titled Manager Authorization and Removal. It was signed by my grandmother, and by me. It stated, plainly, that I had the right to appoint or remove any person acting on behalf of the building's management, including family members, effective immediately upon written notice. Under that was a typed letter already prepared, with a blank line for the date, a removal notice. My grandmother had written it as if she knew exactly how things might unfold. I didn't fill it in yet. I just photographed it, scanned it using the bank's copy service, and placed it back. Then I opened the flash drive sleeve and tucked it into my bag without plugging it in. Not there, not yet. On the way home, I stopped by a print shop and made hard copies of the key documents. Not because I loved paper, but because paper is harder to erase. Back at my apartment, I set up what my grandmother would have called a clean desk. One pile for ownership documents, one for communication, one for financial records, one for tenant notes. I wrote dates on sticky tabs and lined things up so I could find them quickly without thinking. Then I plugged in the flash drive. A folder opened automatically. Inside were scanned invoices, bank statements, email threads, and a spreadsheet titled Monthly Transfers Summary. I sat very still and scrolled. The spreadsheet was organized by date, payee, amount, and memo line. Many entries were highlighted, some in yellow, some in red. Ruth's notes were typed in a small font in a column labeled Observations. It wasn't a rant. It wasn't emotional. It was documentation. I cross-checked a handful of entries against the printed bank records I'd already seen. They matched. Then I opened one email thread and saw something that made my hands go cold. Not from fear, but from clarity. Tessa wasn't just talking to advisors. She was coordinating with them, scheduling, tracking vacancy targets, discussing which tenants were most likely to move quickly. There were even notes about inspection pressure and paper trail management. I saved copies to a secure folder and backed them up to an external drive I kept for building records. Then I moved to step 2, freeze damage. I logged into the building's property management portal, the one that handles payments and notices. My grandmother had kept the admin credentials. I had them because I'd always handled repairs and rent receipts. I changed the password. Then I updated the admin email to mine. Then I enabled 2-factor authentication. It took 5 minutes. No drama, just a door quietly locked. After that, I emailed the building's longtime vendors: plumber, electrician, HVAC, pest control, short message. Please confirm that no changes to work orders, billing, or access permissions are authorized unless they come directly from me in writing. Each one replied within the hour. Most said some version of, "We've only ever dealt with you anyway." That made me pause, because it reminded me how much of the building's daily life I'd been holding already, without the title. Then I moved to step 3. Document everything. I created a call log. Every time my parents or Tessa reached out, I noted the time and what they said. If they texted, I saved it. If they called and left a voicemail, I saved the audio file. If they cornered me in person, I wrote a summary immediately afterward. I wasn't doing it because I wanted a fight. I was doing it because people who push like this often rely on the absence of a record. By late afternoon, the residents were gathering again in small groups, quietly, in the community room on the first floor. Someone had brought a tray of store-bought cookies. Someone else had brewed coffee that tasted like it had been sitting too long, but nobody cared. I stood at the front of the room and didn't make a speech. I just told them the process. "I'm asking everyone to keep every notice you receive," I said. "Photograph it. Don't throw anything away. If anyone knocks asking to enter your unit, don't let them in unless you see written notice that follows the rules. If you're unsure, call me." A woman in the back raised her hand. "Are we safe?" I took a breath. "As of today," I said, "no rent changes are approved, no evictions are filed, no redevelopment agreement exists. If anyone tells you otherwise, I need you to tell me immediately." It wasn't inspiring, it wasn't comforting in a movie way, but it was real. After the meeting, Marisol approached me. "You found it," she said. "I did." She nodded slowly. "Ruth would be glad you're being careful." Then she leaned in and lowered her voice. "Tessa has been bringing people around," she said. "Men in suits, looking at the building from the sidewalk, taking pictures. They came yesterday when you were out." I held my face neutral. "Did anyone talk to them?" "A couple tenants said no," she replied. "But they're nervous." "I understand," I said. Then I went upstairs, closed my door, and looked at the calendar on my wall. Uncle Ray's office address was in my grandmother's contact book, and I knew Tessa liked using him as a family neutral. He wasn't neutral. He was useful to her because he hated conflict and liked neat solutions. If she was escalating, she would try to force a meeting, a conference room, a table, papers and folders, a controlled setting. I wanted that too, just not on her terms. My phone buzzed again. A text from Tessa. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Uncle Ray's office. Bring whatever documents you think you have. Mom and Dad will be there. We're finalizing decisions." I read it once. Then I screenshot it and added it to the folder. Then I opened my email and drafted one message to a single person. Martin Klein. Subject line: Request for urgent review. Parkview Holdings, LLC. I kept it brief. I attached a few documents. I asked for a meeting first thing in the morning. Then I sat back in my chair and listened to the building settle into night. I didn't feel victorious. I felt organized. And I knew that tomorrow I wasn't going to argue. I was going to define what was real. Then I waited. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind was already moving through steps. I made coffee, ate a piece of toast without tasting it, and laid the documents out on my table in the order I planned to use them. Ownership first, authority second, financial records third, communication last. I dressed simply, dark jeans, a clean sweater, no jewelry except my watch. Then I slid the binder and a slim folder into my bag, along with the external drive and 2 printed copies of everything I considered essential. Before I left, I walked down the stairs and checked the lobby like I always do. The building smelled like laundry detergent and someone's breakfast. A radio played faintly behind a door. I paused by Mrs. Alvarez's unit and listened for a moment. Quiet, normal, that mattered. At 9:20, my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered. "This is Martin Klein," a calm voice said. "I reviewed what you sent. I can meet you at 9:45, my office, 20 minutes. I didn't hesitate. "I can be there." "Bring originals if you have them," he said. "And do not discuss this with your sister before you're seated at the meeting." "I wasn't planning to," I replied. "Good," he said, and ended the call. His office was exactly as I remembered it. Quiet, clean, the kind of place where the air feels still. There was a bowl of mints on the table and a wall calendar that hadn't been updated in months, which oddly reassured me. Martin himself was older now, silver hair, glasses, a steady face. He didn't waste time. He read quickly, turning pages with the ease of someone who knows where the traps are. When he saw the operating agreement naming me as sole managing member, he nodded once, like a mechanic hearing an engine note and recognizing the problem. "This is valid," he said. "Your grandmother structured it carefully." He flipped to the manager authorization document and tapped the page with his pen. "This is your lever," he added. "Not to threaten, to stop unauthorized action." I watched his face as he scanned the transfer summary and email threads. "This," he said, "is not a family disagreement. This is potential misappropriation." He didn't sound angry. He sounded factual. I felt something settle in my chest, not triumph, more like the floor finally holding. "What do I do in the meeting?" I asked. Martin set his pen down. "You do not debate," he said. "You state, you show, you stop the process, you do not accuse emotionally, you let the documents do it." He slid a notepad toward me and wrote 3 lines in block letters. "I am the managing member. No changes are authorized without my signature. All further communication is in writing." Then he looked up. "And you say as little as possible beyond that," he added. "If they escalate, you end the meeting." I nodded. He stood, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a single page with a header and signature block. "This is a notice of removal for anyone acting without authority," he said. "Your grandmother prepared a version. I'm giving you an updated one with current dates and references. You may not need to use it, but you will have it." I took the paper and placed it in my folder. At 10:02, I left his office and drove to Uncle Ray's building. It was a small business suite in a modest office block, nothing fancy, just carpeted hallways and framed motivational prints. The kind of place where people pretend to be calm, even when they're not. Tessa had chosen it for that reason. I arrived a few minutes late on purpose, not as a tactic, as a boundary. I wasn't going to run into the room like I was catching up to their plan. When I stepped inside the conference room, they were already seated. Tessa sat straight-backed in a navy blazer, a glossy packet in front of her. My parents were beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, like they'd practiced solidarity on the drive over. Uncle Ray sat at the head of the table, hands folded, face polite in the strained way he gets when he wants everyone to behave. Tessa's eyes moved to my bag immediately. "You brought a binder," she said with a small smile. "Okay." I didn't react to her tone. I set my bag down, took out my folder and binder, and placed them neatly in front of me. Uncle Ray cleared his throat. "Let's keep this professional," he said, looking at me, then at Tessa. "We're here to resolve a structural issue." Tessa leaned forward. "This is simple," she said. "We're moving the building to market rate. We have a timeline. We have advisors. Mom and Dad agree. We can't keep subsidizing tenants forever." My mother nodded quickly. My father stared at the table like he was trying to be firm without having to speak. I waited until Tessa stopped talking. Not because I was intimidated, because I wanted the room to feel the silence. I wanted the difference between performance and reality to be obvious. Then I opened my folder and slid one page across the table. The operating agreement. I placed it closer to Uncle Ray first, because he was the only one there who might actually read it with care. "I'm the sole managing member of Parkview Holdings LLC," I said calmly. "That LLC owns the building." Tessa's smile stayed in place for half a second too long. "That's not correct," she said. "The building is in the family trust." I nodded once like I was acknowledging she believed that. "The trust does not control this asset," I replied. "This entity does. The transfer was executed years ago." My father finally looked up. "What entity?" he asked, confused, not angry. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer with emotion. I answered with procedure. "You can read the agreement," I said, and turned the binder so the signature page faced him. My mother leaned in, eyes scanning. Tessa reached for the page, then stopped herself, like touching it might make it more real. Uncle Ray adjusted his glasses and began reading. His face changed slowly. The kind of shift that happens when someone realizes they've been given the wrong set of assumptions. "This has been notarized," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied. Tessa's voice sharpened. "You're saying you own it?" "I'm saying I have full authority over decisions," I said, "including rent changes, inspections, and any redevelopment discussions. None of those actions are valid without my signature." My mother sat back, jaw tight. "That would mean," she started, then stopped. Tessa turned her head slightly toward my parents, a quick look that felt like a warning. Then she looked back at me. "You're being manipulated," she said. "Grandma wasn't well at the end, you know that." I didn't argue. I didn't defend my grandmother's memory in a speech. I opened the binder to the next document and slid it across. Manager authorization and removal. "My grandmother prepared this while she was fully competent," I said. "It names me as the person with authority to appoint or remove anyone acting on behalf of the building's management." Uncle Ray's hand hovered over the page like it was hot. Tessa's posture tightened. My father's face went pale, then flushed. My mother stared at the paper and whispered, "Ruth did this?" I held her gaze briefly. "Yes," I said. The room went quiet. Not a dramatic quiet. Just the kind that happens when the story people have been repeating to themselves runs out of words. Then Tessa pushed her glossy packet forward again, like it could save her. "You're stalling," she said, voice controlled but strained. "Even if that paperwork exists, we have agreements in motion. You can't just block progress because you feel sentimental." I nodded once. "I'm not blocking progress," I replied. "I'm blocking unauthorized action." Then I opened my folder to the next section, the one I hadn't wanted to use unless I had to. I slid the first page of the transfer summary across the table, face down at first, and kept my hand on it. "I need to ask a simple question," I said, still calm. "Do you want this meeting to stay about authority, or do you want it to move into financial records?" Tessa didn't answer right away. My parents didn't either. Uncle Ray looked at my hand on the page, then at my face, like he was finally understanding that this wasn't going to be solved with a family lecture. I lifted my hand and turned the page over. Then I waited. The paper lay between us like a quiet weight. It was just a spreadsheet printout. Dates, payees, amounts, memo lines. But the longer it sat there, the harder it became to pretend it was nothing. Tessa's eyes flicked over the top row and then away, like looking directly at it would make her lose control of the room. My mother leaned forward again, slower this time, her mouth slightly open in the way it gets when she's reading something she doesn't want to understand. My father's hands were folded, knuckles pale. Uncle Ray cleared his throat once, then didn't speak. He was reading. I didn't rush them. I let the silence do what it does. It forces attention. These are transfers from the building's accounts, I said, labeled as maintenance and consulting. Tessa finally spoke, voice tight. Those are standard. You don't understand how portfolio management works. I understand labels, I replied, and I understand invoices. I slid another sheet over, then another. One showed recurring payments to Holt Advisory Group. Another showed payments to Keystone Redevelopment Services. The amounts were too consistent to be emergency repairs. The dates were too regular to be one-time work. My mother looked up at me sharply. "Are you accusing your sister of stealing?" she asked. I kept my voice even. "I'm showing you transactions that don't align with work performed, that's all." Tessa's chair shifted, a small scrape against the floor. Her composure was still there, but it had turned brittle. "These are normal business expenses," she repeated, a little louder. Uncle Ray held up a hand, not dramatic, just enough to pause her. "Do you have invoices for these?" he asked Tessa. She blinked once. "They're with our advisors." Uncle Ray nodded as if he'd expected that. Then he looked at me. "Do you have supporting documents?" he asked. I did not smile. I did not look at Tessa. I opened my folder and slid out printed email threads. "These are emails between Tessa and Graham Holt," I said. "They discuss accelerating vacancies, using rent pressure, and coordinating inspections." Tessa's face changed, not into anger, into calculation. "That's private correspondence," she said quickly, "and it's out of context." "It's dated," I replied, "and it references the building directly." My father's voice came out low. "Tessa." She turned toward him fast. "Dad, you don't understand. This is how you position an asset. This is how you protect the family long term." My mother's eyes were glossy now, but she was still trying to hold the shape of her belief. "We trusted you," she said to Tessa. Tessa's jaw tightened. "You trusted me to do what you were too afraid to do." I watched them without stepping into the emotion, not because I didn't feel anything, but because this was not the moment for it. This was the moment for structure. Uncle Ray rubbed his forehead. "Okay," he said, voice strained. "Okay, we need to stop and get clarity." He looked at me again. "What do you want to happen here?" I answered plainly. "I want all rent notices rescinded," I said. "I want all inspections halted unless they comply with legal notice requirements and my written approval. And I want all building accounts frozen against any new payees until a third party reviews the last 2 years." Tessa let out a small laugh that didn't have humor in it. "You can't freeze accounts," she said. "I already changed access credentials," I replied, calm. "And I'm the managing member. Vendors have been notified. Payments to unverified entities stop today." My mother stared at me, surprised. "You did that?" "Yes," I said. My father's shoulders slumped slightly. Not defeat. More like a delayed realization of how far this had gone. Tessa leaned back, crossing her arms. "This is insane," she said. "You're going to tank the building because you want to play hero for tenants who can't afford to live in the city anymore." I didn't react to the bait. "I'm not here to discuss what people deserve," I said. "I'm here to enforce legal control and protect residents from intimidation." Uncle Ray's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, then at the door, like he was suddenly aware of time. There was a knock, not loud, just firm. He stood and opened the conference room door. A woman in a dark coat stepped in with a folder under her arm. Behind her was a man in a plain suit, holding a badge wallet, not raised, just visible enough. Uncle Ray's face drained slightly. The woman spoke first. "Aaron Blake?" I stood. "Yes." "My name is Dana Cho," she said. "I'm with the city's housing compliance unit." She turned slightly and nodded toward the man behind her.
And this is Investigator Miguel Santos with the city attorney's office. Tessa froze. My mother made a soft sound like she'd inhaled and forgot to exhale. Uncle Ray looked at me, then back at them. What is this? Dana's voice stayed professional. We received a complaint regarding mass rent increases and pressure tactics in an occupied multi-unit property. We're here to confirm current ownership, management authority, and tenant communications. I reached into my folder and pulled out the certified filings Martin had arranged, along with the operating agreement. I can provide that, I said, and handed them over. Miguel Santos looked down at the documents, then up at Tessa. We'll also need to discuss financial activity tied to management decisions, he said, calm, not accusatory. Specifically payments routed to entities connected to redevelopment consulting. Tessa's voice came out thin. This is a misunderstanding. Miguel didn't argue. He simply opened his folder and slid out a page, then another. We've already pulled records connected to Holt Advisory Group, he said. There are inconsistencies we need to clarify. I watched my sister's face shift again. The confidence wasn't gone yet, but it was now surrounded by the edges of panic. She looked at my parents like she wanted them to fix it. My parents looked like they couldn't. Dana Cho addressed the room without raising her voice. Effective immediately, she said. All rent increase notices issued without proper process are subject to review. Any harassment or unannounced inspection pressure will result in enforcement actions. She looked at me again. If you are confirming you are the managing authority, we'll coordinate with you directly. Yes, I replied. Miguel Santos angled his body toward Tessa.
Ms. Blake, he said, we'll need you to come with us for an interview. You are not under arrest at this moment, but you are required to respond to a formal request. Tessa's mouth opened, then closed. She stared at the documents on the table like they'd rearranged the room. My mother stood abruptly. Wait, she said. This is our daughter. Dana's expression softened slightly, but her tone didn't change. We understand, she said, but we have to follow process. My father didn't move. He reminded me of a man watching a bridge collapse, realizing too late he'd been standing on it. Tessa looked at me, not with anger, with disbelief, as if she couldn't accept that the same sister she'd dismissed as the building manager was now the person the city was listening to. I didn't look away. I didn't add anything. I just let the reality sit there, clean and unavoidable. A few minutes later, the meeting ended without a conclusion anyone had planned.
Dana and Miguel left with copies of documents. Uncle Ray looked like he'd aged an hour. My parents stood in the hallway, stunned, speaking to each other in clipped fragments. Tessa was escorted out, still upright, still trying to maintain a posture that didn't match the situation. I walked to my car alone. The sky was overcast, the air cool. Traffic moved normally on the street like nothing significant had happened. I sat in the driver's seat and placed my hands on the steering wheel, waiting until my breathing returned to baseline. My phone vibrated. A text from Mrs. Alvarez. Are we okay? I stared at it for a second, then typed back. Not perfect, but stable. I'll come by tonight. Then I turned the key in the ignition and drove back to the building, not feeling like I'd won anything, just feeling like the floor had stopped shifting. That evening, I unlocked the office closet on the first floor, the one where my grandmother used to keep spare supplies. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and opened it to a clean page. At the top, I wrote one line, immediate stabilization plan. Then I began listing the next steps, one by one. That night, after most of the building had gone quiet, I sat at the small desk in the first floor office and worked the way my grandmother used to. No rushing, no big speeches, just steady, practical actions that add up. I made a clean list of what needed to happen next, and I kept it simple. Confirm in writing that the rent notices were withdrawn, send tenants a clear update with their rights and the actual current rent amounts, schedule a third-party audit of the building accounts, lock down access to the management portal and banking permissions, create a log for any visits, calls, or notices related to inspections, coordinate with the city contact for compliance follow-up. Then I printed the update letter. I didn't use legal language that would confuse people. I wrote it in plain English, the way you talk to neighbors. I explained that no rent increase was approved, that no one should feel pressured to let strangers into their unit, that all communication should come through me in writing, and that anyone who received a notice should keep it and send me a photo. I included a phone number for the city housing office Dana had given me, and I included Jasmine's number too. Jasmine was the housing counselor Marisol had mentioned, someone calm who understood tenant protections better than I did. Before I posted the letter, I walked the building again. I took the stairs slowly, one floor at a time. The radiator noises were softer now. Doors were shut. A television murmured behind a wall. Someone's dryer buzzed and stopped. On the second floor, Mrs. Alvarez opened her door before I even knocked, like she'd been waiting for the sound of my steps. "Are we okay?" she asked again, quieter than in her text. I kept my voice steady. "The notice isn't enforceable, and the city is involved now. You're not being pushed out in 30 days. She blinked a few times and pressed a hand to her chest. "Thank you," she said, and it didn't sound like gratitude for me. It sounded like relief for her own life continuing. Across the hall, Mr. Coyle cracked his door open and asked, "Is it over?" I paused. "It's calmer," I said, "and it's going to stay within the rules from here." He nodded once, accepting that answer because it was honest. Down the corridor, the Park family's door opened, and the little boy peeked out. His mother stood behind him and looked tired, but the tension in her face had eased a little. "Do we need to pack?" she asked. "Not tonight," I said. "Put the box away if you can." She exhaled and nodded, and I watched her hand settle on her son's shoulder, the way you do when you're trying to signal safety without promising too much. Back downstairs, I taped the letter in the lobby by the mailboxes. Then I taped another copy on each floor. I made sure it was straight. I made sure it was readable. I made sure it didn't sound like a threat or a celebration, just facts. After that, I went to my apartment and did something I hadn't done in days. I cleaned, not deeply, not perfectly, just enough to feel like my space belonged to me again. I washed the dishes. I wiped down the table where Tessa had dropped the notice. I threw out old receipts and junk mail. I took the folder with the rent notice and filed it in a drawer labeled Tenant Communications, then shut the drawer gently. I made another cup of tea and stood by the window, looking down at the street. My parents called twice that evening. I let both calls go to voicemail. The next morning, I listened to them with my coffee in hand. My mother's voice was shaky, trying to find the right tone. She said they didn't understand. She said they thought Tessa was handling things. She said they didn't know about any of the transfers. She asked if we could talk. My father's voicemail was shorter. He sounded tired. He said my grandmother would be proud. He said he was sorry. I didn't call back right away, not because I wanted to punish them, but because I needed boundaries to stay clear. The building needed clarity more than my family needed comfort. So I wrote one email, simple and clean, and I sent it to both of them. I'm focused on stabilizing the building and protecting residents. I'll communicate in writing for now. When I'm ready to talk, I'll reach out. Then I left it there. Over the next few weeks, things moved the way real consequences move. Slowly, through paperwork. Dana's office followed up with written notices and timelines. Vendors confirmed their work history and submitted invoices where they had them. The bank flagged certain payees pending review. An independent accountant began reconciling the last 2 years of transactions. No one celebrated. People just started breathing again. Mrs. Alvarez began leaving her door slightly open the way she used to, letting warm cooking smells drift into the hall. Mr. Coyle stopped pacing. The Park family's boy started riding his little scooter in the hallway again after school, careful not to bump the walls. The building wasn't suddenly perfect. The stair runner still needed replacing. The boiler still made its old humming complaint. The paint in the lobby still looked tired under the light. But it was steady, and that was enough. One evening, I pulled out the weatherproof box and placed it back under the floor panel in the basement, not because I wanted to hide things, but because my grandmother had taught me something important. Power doesn't need to be visible to be real. I left one thing out, though. Her note. I kept it in my desk drawer, folded once, the pencil lines still faint under the ink. A reminder that she had seen this kind of moment coming, and she had trusted me to move through it without turning into the thing I was trying to stop. A month later, Marisol caught me by the mailboxes and asked quietly, "How are you holding up?" I thought about it. "I'm tired," I said, "but I can sleep again, see that matters." She nodded like she understood. Then she hesitated and added, "There's another building 2 blocks over. Different owner, similar pressure. A few tenants asked if you'd talk to them." I didn't answer right away. I just looked down at the keys in my hand and felt the weight of responsibility that comes with knowing how these things work. "I can at least listen," I said. That night, I went upstairs and set my phone face down on the table, the same way I had on the day the notice arrived. This time, the silence felt different. Not empty, not heavy, just quiet. And for the first time in a long time, quiet felt like something I could trust. If you stayed with me through this, thanks for being here. If you'd like, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps more than people realize, especially for channels like this where we tell real stories in a calm way. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I always like seeing how far these stories travel. 2 popular stories are going to appear next, so you can pick one and keep listening.